Gonzaga brought a ton of talent to Spokane this offseason, but plenty of questions remain about how all the pieces are going to fit together.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, folks? Happy August, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by Gametime. Folks, download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Well, folks, thrilled to be joined today by Tuck Clarry of House of Kraus. It is a podcast, a Substack, a Discord, all sorts of good stuff talking Gonzaga basketball. If you don't follow along, definitely check it out. Tuck is here, and we're just going to kind of break down the key offseason storylines at this point for Gonzaga. We figure it's a new month. We're right in the thick of the offseason. Let's kind of look at where we're at here with this team. We're going to talk the backcourt, which is entirely new heading into this season. We're going to talk about the wing rotation, specifically what Tyon Grant Foster brings to this team. We're going to take a look at the schedule for the Zags, what we know so far, and talk a little bit about the team's impending move to the Pac-12. But Tuck, I want to start by talking about the backcourt because this is an entirely new look group. The only player who played backcourt minutes for Gonzaga last year who is back this season is Emmanuel Innocente, and he was not a particularly big-time player for the team, and so it's going to be a different look. You lose three seniors with Ryan Nembhard, Nolan Hickman, and Caleb Battle all out the door. You lose a guy who was in the program for a couple of years in Dusty Stromer, yet this group feels like it could be really special next season. You have Braden Smith, who of course sat out all of last year as a redshirt, so he's going to be ideally more equipped to kind of take the reins right away from Ryan Nembhard at that point guard position. But the most intriguing addition in the backcourt is Mario Saint-Supery, the 19-year-old Spanish guard who came over, kind of finally got his paperwork done in late June, was on campus for a few weeks, and is now going back to Spain to play for the national team. Probably won't be back to Spokane again until like mid-September. So a really exciting addition, a really talented player, drawn comparisons to Ricky Rubio for his passing and facilitation skills. Yet he's not going to really have had a whole lot of time to get used to this offense, used to this system, used to the coaching staff before the season begins. Is that something that how do you think that's going to work for him in terms of what his role might look like right away for the Zags?
It may stunt how quickly he's implemented, or they may bring him on a little slower than they would have if he was here all summer. But I mean, I think it's kind of fortunate that they're dealing with a kid that was in a top 3 league in the world for his whole teenage life. I can't imagine that there's going to be an adjustment period, but it's the role that he's likely going to have to start out this season is probably pretty similar to what he was doing for Manresa, which is largely being that secondary ball handler on the court, a connecting piece, and then a finishing piece when his number's called or when the situation's right. I think that his skill set and his savviness makes it not too big of a adjustment period for him.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I'm at too. And Mark Few alluded to this briefly, a conversation he had with Theo Lawson of the Spokesman Review, basically said, we envision Mario being able to play kind of the 1 or the 2 and play off the ball. And we know that Gonzaga has thrived. They've had their best seasons historically when they are willing to play 2 ball handlers, 2 point guards together. Obviously, the 2 national championship appearances, always like to reference this. It was Josh Perkins and Nigel Williams-Goss. They were both point guards. They were both ball handlers. And then in the 2021 season, when Gonzaga was undefeated until the Baylor fiasco, they started Jalen Suggs and Andrew Nembhard that season. And Nembhard didn't start at the beginning of the year, but the team really picked up steam when he entered the starting lineup about halfway through. And so we know that that's something that Gonzaga likes to do. And it really seems like it's going to be a fit because, again, Braden Smith's not new to the team. the way that Ryan Nembhard was new to the team, where it took him kind of a half season to really kind of find his bearings and he was good in the first half of his first season, but he was much better in the second half of that season. And of course, in his senior season, Braden Smith may not have that big of an adjustment period. It'll still be some level of an adjustment, but I think letting Saint-Supery play more off the ball makes a ton of sense. And the fact that it's also similar to the role he's already familiar with, having played that at Manresa, I think is really encouraging for what he could do right away for this team. Having said that, how do you see that backcourt working? Like with Braden Smith, what we know about him, we haven't seen him in a while, but he was very productive at Colgate when he was there, and the Patriot League Player of the Year. And kind of, he's drawn comparisons to Ryan Nembhard. That's not an incredibly fair comparison to put on anybody at this point, but there are some similarities in their style of play. How do you kind of see the two of them playing off each other? And do you see that being a lineup we see quite a bit of? Because one of the concerns I would have with that lineup would be the floor spacing and the three-point shooting, because it's likely going to throw Adam Miller on the bench. Miller, a guy who shot 43% last year. Gonzaga was not a good three-point shooting team last year, and it's certainly an area they want to improve this year. So I'm curious, between those three guys, kind of how exactly that lineup's going to shake out. I think it's going to be one of the fun storylines coming into this year.
Yeah, there's a lot to learn in terms of how ready Braden Smith is, but I would assume by the fact that they didn't recruit over him that they're fairly confident that he can take the keys. So I'm not overly concerned with that. So I would assume that Mario's minutes more so impact Adam Miller's. And Adam Miller, as you mentioned, 40% three-point shooter last season, but at the same time, it's not like those numbers have been career numbers. That we could see a recession going back to the mean in terms of his production. And Mario, I think that we have this idea that Mario is an okay three-point shooter. He shot 36% for the season in ACB, but I think so much of that too is the fact that it's so hard to get consistency on a really bad ACB team, in the sense that his minutes fluctuated so greatly. But once he turned a corner, and he turned a massive corner in the last 3 months of the season, he was a 41% three-point shooter the last 3 months of the season on 2.5 attempts. That's not a huge volume, but if he's a 35% plus three-point shooter on 5 attempts, Andy, I'm going to be real with you. I understand that we need to be reasonable and we need to pump the brakes in terms of how we talk about Gonzaga. There's just that regression from that Baylor game last season to what the team ended up being last year. But I don't think it's properly contextualized how good of a player Mario is, in the sense that if Mario was an American prospect, he would be a top 20 player in this class. There are maybe 3 point guard combo guards I would take over him in terms of how he would develop as a 2-year player, or how he would impact the season for his freshman year. But the only other 3 players are Mikel Brown Jr., and then there's Darren Peterson, and I would throw Darius Acuff in there, but none of those guys are going to stay 2 years. And if this Mario thing works out, Mario's probably going to be a 2-year project where he becomes the guy next year. And he can pretty much do everything on a court, especially at the college level. He was playing against 35-year-olds. He played against Real Madrid, who's like the best team in that league, and he was matched up against a 37-year-old that is Mr. Spain, that Sergio Llull. That guy's 37 years old. He's played the most minutes in the history of that league. He has made the most threes in that league, won MVP, and Mario was fine, unfazed by being defended by him. He's like, I think that we are going to look back after this season and see where Mario is next year, whether that's at Gonzaga or professionally, and say like, oh, we saw exactly the moment that he turned a corner and became one of the best players in the sport at the college level.
as much as college basketball is getting older, there's not a lot of 37-year-olds Mario is going to be facing at this level. And so, yeah, I'm with you 100%. I think he's a player that it's difficult to contextualize a guy who played, whose minutes weren't huge at that level because of the competition, and to know what that looks like for a high school prospect comparatively. But that is what he is. And you're right. I think, Brown and Acuff and Peterson are some of the only names that I would really strongly consider ahead of him as well. And if he truly is a 2-year guy at Gonzaga, that second season, I think the first season is going to be special, but that second season could be something unbelievable for him, especially once he's kind of more familiar with this system and the role he's going to play at Gonzaga.
Yeah, look, he's a 3-level scorer. He's going to be one of the best finishing guards in college basketball next year in terms of his ability to dictate how he gets to the cup, the speed, how he adjusts to his defender. He's also going to be legitimately one of the best defenders on the team. There's this idea that Spanish guards, or because he's slight of frame, that he may have difficulty adjusting to athleticism, but that's the athleticism of the NBA. That's not the athleticism of the WCC. That's not the athleticism of college basketball. There are athletes that can blow by him, undoubtedly, but like those athletes are league players. VJ Edgecombe would have been able to get to his spot against Mario, but Mario is a two-way player that will instantly raise the floor, and he's honestly the potential of what the ceiling is.
Well, we're not talking about any more 37-year-olds, but we are going to talk about another newcomer joining Gonzaga who's a little bit on the older end. Tyon Grant Foster hasn't had that opportunity yet to work out with his teammates because he's still waiting on that waiver. So we're going to talk about what that means for Grant Foster, the former Grand Canyon star, coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, when I'm on top of my hydration, I notice that everything works better. My energy is better, my mood is better, my focus, even my skin looks better. But getting enough fluids every day, it's not always easy. And that's why I've been loving Drip Drop. Drip Drop is a doctor-developed, scientifically proven for fast hydration. It uses the perfect balance of sodium electrolytes and glucose to help your body absorb fluids quickly, delivering 3 times the electrolytes and half the sugar of a leading sports drink. My favorite flavor is black cherry for just about everything, including Drip Drop. It is a game changer after a workout or on those extra busy days. Drip Drop has become my go-to, especially during long summer days or when I know I'm going to be out sweating. It saved me more than once from that midday crash. And right now, Drip Drop is offering Locked On listeners 20% off your first order. Just head to dripdrop.com and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege. That's dripdrop.com, promo code LOCKEDONCollege for 20% off. Stock up now before the heat hits hard. All right, folks, still Andy Patton here, still Locked On Zags, still joined by Tuck Clarry, still talking Gonzaga's biggest storylines heading into the month of August here, as we've had a very fun, very exciting offseason for the Zags. Want to talk about the other kind of most exciting newcomer. We didn't get a ton into Adam Miller, but I think, he's somebody who, if the three-point shooting's there, he's going to be super valuable. If the three-point shooting's not there, well, that's why the Zags added Mario Saint-Supery. But it's also why they brought in a guy in Tyon Grant Foster, who has kind of played a variety of roles throughout his college career. And I think it's funny, we talk about Saint-Supery being that secondary ball handler, but Grant Foster is a player who has really thrived with the ball in his hands a lot as well. And I don't think he's going to have, there's only so many players who can have the ball in their hands every single possession. And so for Gonzaga, Grant Foster is going to be playing much more of an off the ball role. Again, we are making the assumption that his waiver will eventually be approved and he will be able to join the team for practices and join the team for this upcoming season. Grant Foster is an incredibly elite scorer. He averaged over 20 points per game at Grand Canyon, was the WAC player of the year, nearly led that Grand Canyon team to an upset win over Alabama in the tournament in Spokane a few years ago. But I'm interested because of all the players on this roster. I think Grant Foster is likely going to be asked to be playing a role less similar to the role he played at Grand Canyon. And we don't have a lot of data on how he's going to do in a role different than that, because he only played one game at DePaul, and it was many years ago when he played at Kansas. So I'm interested in what that is going to look like for Grant Foster, because if he struggles to adjust to that role, I think that's a big concern for Gonzaga on the perimeter. But if he can fluidly play that spot, that's just another really big weapon for the Zags.
Yeah, he unlocks so many interesting things. He's in the 90 percentile for steals and blocks in college basketball, which is just kind of, something Gonzaga's really never had. He's here. Let me put it this way. Graham Ike in 2023, 2024 was a 50% shooter at the rim with 33% of those shot or makes assisted. And that's by far the lowest in terms of assisted percentage makes at the rim for a Gonzaga player. Tyon Graham Foster shot 54% at the rim with 27% of those shots assisted.
Wow.
He is so slithery at getting to the rim, to getting to his spots. I think when we talk about his efficiency, context needs to be added about the fact that he was the guy on a Grand Canyon team where, look, Bryce Drew is one of the great mid-major program builders for what he's done at Grand Canyon, but X's and O's wise, it was a lot of isolation. Hope we get out in transition and score, but other than that, it's half court isolation stuff, and that was largely Tyon Graham Foster dependent. And there's going to be a lot easier looks for him in this offense. Obviously, usage is going to go down. I would say that where Adam Miller kind of fits the Nolan Hickman 3-point shooting role as a spot up guy on the corner and above the break, we're going to see Tyon Graham Foster likely be asked to be that Caleb Battle get me a bucket kind of player. We'll see how that works in terms of spacing and everything, because he's not necessarily a 3-point shooter, but at the same time, his 3-point percentage was largely dipped because he came back pretty early from an injury to start off the year. And he just was atrocious shooting wise in December, but January on, he was a 35% 3-point shooter on around 2.5 attempts. But I would say Tyon Graham Foster, if he's able to fit into his role, that buoys the floor of this Gonzaga team to the point that I think that there's legitimate questions if this is, the best team in the last 3 years that they've had.
With Grant Foster, I think you bring up a great point about the defense, because I do think that the easy comparison for him offensively is Caleb Battle. Like, can he play that same role where he's, where he's asked to go get a bucket in the right environment, but, certainly isn't going to have the ball in his hands as regularly as he did previously. But Grant Foster is a better defensive player than Caleb Battle. Caleb Battle was a hardworking player on that end of the floor, but was just limited. I mean, Grant Foster's a couple inches taller. He's got a bigger wingspan. And like you said, his high level at steals and blocks, and something that I think, doesn't get talked about a ton for Grant Foster, but I think is a huge part of what he brings to this team. And what makes it so interesting to me is Gonzaga has this kind of trio of wings who I think are all vying for minutes and all really defensive focused. I mean, Grant Foster is very clearly the best offensively out of the trio, the other ones being Jalen Warley and Emmanuel Innocente. And then you have Steele Venters, who's much more of an offensive player than a defensive player. And so I think you can see this emphasis that Mark Few and Gonzaga have put on building a roster around having more defensive versatility and being a little bit kind of more physical, a little bit just having more kind of nastiness on that end of the floor than they've had in the past few years. And they didn't add anybody in the front court that makes a big impact defensively, but you're going to see a bigger role from Ismaila Diani, who is certainly going to make an impact on that end of the floor. But I think for Gonzaga, like, this wing group kind of has a lot of defensive talent, but not a lot of floor spacing. Grant Foster is not a great 3-point shooter. Jalen Warley is allergic to shooting outside shots. Emmanuel Innocente, was more willing and I think has a good looking shot, but didn't knock him down at a super high clip last year. So that would be one thing that I would point to of you mentioned Saint-Supery is probably a better shooter than he's getting credit for. I agree with you on that. I agree that Adam Miller, he should get better looks than he got, but most of his career, he's not been a 40% 3-point shooter. So we can't necessarily assume that's going to happen. Steele Venters coming off 2 years of injuries. Like if the 3-point shooting's not there, I worry that teams can pack the paint and make life a lot more difficult for both Huff and Ike. And Grant Foster feels like a guy who's going to be on the floor a lot, but is he going to be able to knock down shots more consistently because he's getting a lot better looks? He's definitely going to get better looks. There's no doubt about that. This offense is far more built to get him looks than the Grand Canyon offense was, but he's still got to prove he can knock him down. And to me, that feels like a huge kind of hinge for this team's ability to thrive offensively the way they want to next year.
Yeah, we can talk about this. This might be a later conversation at some point before the season, but this team ceiling is ultimately decided by you need one of Emmanuel Innocenti, Braden Huff, and Mario, I suppose, to be a consistent knockdown 3-point shooter to a level that it makes everything else make sense. And it's not impossible. It's not unlikely, but it's not something you can necessarily bank on. I think the question is too, Andy. I'm interested in your opinion on this. Do you see Braden Huff and Graham Ike and Ismaila Diane splitting the 4 and 5 position all season? Because I don't know how that works. I don't know how Tyon Grant Foster isn't going to be asked to play the 4 for minutes for spells. I don't know if Steele is going to play the 4 and Tyon kind of helps him in helps in terms of dealing with cutters, but like it's just that's just a lot. That's almost more of an ask than getting 3-point shooting consistent.
Yeah. I honestly am struggling to figure out where that's going to happen too, and I think that's one of the biggest questions for this team in terms of just like logistical lineup spot stuff, because Graham and Braden and Diane cannot combined play 80 minutes a game. It's not going to happen. It cannot happen. Graham's, I don't think, played more than 23, 24 minutes per game at Gonzaga. Huff hasn't played more than 17. Both of those numbers should tick up, but even if they're both playing 27 minutes per game combined, Diane's, I don't think he can give you more than like 15 or 20, maybe. And that's the best case scenario for all three of those guys. And there's still some minutes to be had. I mean, you didn't really replace either Ben Gregg or Michael Ajayi, unless you count Parker Jefferson. And I maybe Jefferson plays right away. Maybe that's the plan. I would be a little surprised by that. People who are close to the program don't seem to think he's going to redshirt. I kind of thought that he would, but maybe he is filling that in. I do know that when Steele Venters was first recruited, they talked about him as playing a small ball, or they talked about him in a Corey Kispert-like role. Corey Kispert did play the 4. Like, that is a role that he played a lot at Gonzaga. So maybe they think Steele fits that role, but he's not a great rebounder. So I don't know. I'm not sure. At first I thought it'd be Jalen Warley, but if you watch his tape, like, that's just, I don't really see him fitting that. He's more like a point forward than he is like a 4. So yeah, it's a huge question for me. I think it's probably Steele if he's healthy, but I don't know that I love that. And I am a little concerned of, like, Braden Huff's not going to play 40 minutes a night at the 4. We've seen him. I mean, from a conditioning perspective, he's not going to do it. From a foul perspective, like, if Mark Few is going to continue to pull guys when they pick up 2 fouls, Gonzaga is going to have some issues in the front court in terms of not being able to play those 3 guys as many minutes as they'd like. So yeah, it's a big question that I have. I hadn't really thought about Grant Foster, and I might have to ponder on that a little bit more, because I don't think you want to try to teach him a bunch of different roles, especially when he's not even on campus yet. But he probably could do it, especially defensively. But yeah, I'm not sure they have any better options unless they feel real confident about what Steele's going to be able to bring this year.
Because, like, the question is, does that take away the thing that he's best at, as being like a switchable wing that can guard forwards and guards? And I think that's possible. I just think, like, maybe that's the solution if you have all of these wings to get Innocenti more run. I think that, like, unfortunately for him, I don't know how Warley gets considerable minutes on this team, especially as you said, he had more of a point forward role at Virginia, and it's not like he's going to be asked to do that necessarily. So I don't know what opportunities he's really going to get in this offense or in this rotation. But yeah, in a perfect world, you could play Innocenti and Tyon Grant Foster together. I mean, that's 2 incredibly switchable players that can just smother the ball. I would love for Mark Few to consider pressing not just on makes or providing ball pressure. But that's not really in the DNA of this team. So I think ultimately it's going to be Tyon Grant Foster, then spelled by Innocenti. The staff is confident in Emmanuel's progression, so he could even push Tyon for that. But the options are there.
That's what I feel like some of the moves we've seen this team make have kind of indicated that maybe they have been more impressed by Innocenti than they expected they would be, which I think is it's not wouldn't be surprising to hear that. I mean, he was a relatively unheralded transfer from Tarleton State, and when he got his opportunities, he was very, very good. But Warley and Innocenti are so similar to me, and if neither of them are starting, which at this point, unless Grant Foster's waiver is denied, I think is pretty clearly the case. And even if his waiver is denied, I still think Warley might come off the bench. Those two guys just feel kind of superfluous. So I am interested in that, because it makes the decision by Dusty Stromer far more clear, because he's also similar to those two guys and was like, yeah, I'm not going to be the third string defensive focused forward on this team. So I don't blame him there, but yeah, it is an interesting thing. I think Gonzaga's got some fun lineups they could roll out there. I was just thinking of how fun would it be to have like a Diani, Grant Foster, Warley, Innocenti, Superi, where you're probably not scoring a whole lot, but goodness, nobody's scoring on you either. So that might be kind of a fun lineups that they can kind of mix and match with this team. But yeah, I think depth in the front court is definitely, if I had to pick my biggest concern, it would be that, alongside the 3-point shooting. And both of those things could be solved by a fully healthy Steele Venters, which is why I wonder if the staff does feel pretty confident in where he's at. I mean, we've seen a few clips of him. We've seen, he did a good interview with Theo where he kind of talked about his progress, but man, it is really risky to put your eggs in the basket of somebody who's missed 2 full seasons with completely separate injuries. Either of those injuries could kind of crop back up and cause him to miss some time. I hope that's not the case, but yeah, it does feel like they need him to play a role maybe bigger than I would have expected, just because of where their needs are right now.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know what you can bank on with Steele, but anything that you can get out of him is a blessing, honestly.
Well, Tuck, I want to talk a little bit about the schedule here for this team as well. We know parts of it, and we also know that Gonzaga likes to be, if not the last team to reveal their non-conference schedule, one of the last teams in all of college basketball to do so. We know they're taking on both Oklahoma and Creighton in the first week-ish of the season. We know they got Alabama and Maryland in the Players Era Festival. We also know they got Kentucky and UCLA in back-to-back weeks in December. We're expecting Baylor to be part of the schedule. We know a couple other games on there as well, but for a pretty new look team, obviously you have the 2 bigs coming back in EK and Huff, but for the most part, most of the rest of the players who are going to play big minutes for this team are new to the team or haven't played for Gonzaga yet. It feels like this is a nice early season challenge with that Oklahoma game at the arena, with Creighton at home. Like, those are some tough games that this team's going to take on early. Do you like seeing Gonzaga schedule somewhat aggressively early in the season, especially when they have kind of some pieces that haven't really played together much?
It tells me that the staff's confident. There's been times where the staff kind of takes a step back in terms of who they schedule to start out this season. They were confident last year with the Baylor pick, obviously. Yeah. That Oklahoma game, I think, is going to be sneaky tough. I really like what that team did in terms of their pickups with Tay Davis. We're going to learn real quick how ready that Braden Smith in that backcourt is by going against Nigel Pack. That's going to be interesting. But I think it's going to be great in terms of figuring out where this team is and where they have to get better. It's a great opportunity for this team, too, in a year where there's probably about 3 to 4 teams that are really the teams, and there's not really this huge unbeatable team in front of them. It's a great opportunity for them to carve out some protection to maybe work their way to be a protected seed. They got a great draw in terms of Maryland and Alabama, too, in terms of who they could have played at the Players Era. They avoided some subpar quad 2, quad 3 games, which is amazing. I think that the schedule is going to be a challenge, and we're going to have to learn a lot about the team prior to it for us to feel confident about how they're going to do.
What I really like about this schedule too, and some of it was outside of their control with Maryland and Alabama, but they're playing a lot of teams that play very different stylistically, which I think gives them a nice advantage. Alabama, obviously, they love to get up and down. They space the floor. They don't like to shoot anything other than lay-ins and threes. Then you have a UCLA team that plays much slower and is much more kind of tough and physical defensively. Maryland, under Buzz Williams, are going to look a little different, obviously, than they have in the past. But Buzz's teams tend to be, they crash the offensive glass really aggressively. So I think you're going to see a lot of different styles, which I think will hopefully kind of have Gonzaga be more prepared for the NCAA tournament when that rolls around, and it should give them an opportunity to kind of try out some of those different lineups and kind of see, hey, maybe this works a little better against Buzz's team when they're crashing the glass. Maybe we do go a little bigger here and we don't play Steele at the 4, but maybe we can get away with Steele at the 4 against some other teams. Like who knows exactly what it'll be, but I'm interested to see kind of how much Mark Few might mix and match with some of these matchups and some of these different kind of quality and style of opponents that they're going to play based on what we know so far on that non-conference schedule. Tuck, it's too early to make predictions. We don't even know if one of Gonzaga's best players is going to be eligible this year, but you kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but I want to dig in a bit more. Like, it feels like the ceiling for this team is higher than it's been the last couple of years. Like, I think as optimistic as we were after that 38-point win over Baylor, like, that team did have a bit of a ceiling, and obviously they didn't even reach what that was. But I think that this group, if Saint-Supery is the guy that he's capable of being, if Grant Foster adjusts to this role well, if Steele's healthy, like, I think that there is a really high ceiling, like you said, a protected seed. I think this team can be back in that 3-4 seed conversation, maybe even play up to a 2 seed. I mean, the Frontcourt's one of the best, if not the best, in the entire country. Where do you kind of see this team's ceiling at this point, and maybe what are the things that need to happen for them to get there?
For them to get there, I'm mostly concerned about the 4 minutes and just what they're able to do to pair with Braden, Huff, and Grammy K. And I think a lot is on the shoulders of Braden Huff to become the player that a lot of college basketball analysts see him becoming. And I mean, we were talking when he was a freshman about how good his stroke looked, and it's just the shots aren't falling. It's time for the shots to fall. Like, sorry. Sorry. I mean, like, not to add any pressure to it, but it's just to the point where it's like, okay, if you are this dynamic hinge sort of fulcrum of the offense, kind of stretch big man with incredible footwork in the post, it's just, we saw him take some leaps defensively, and that's got to continue. And I think the 4 position is going to decide a lot. I think kind of obviously where Mario is at, and if Mario is able to become the player that I think he can be, and a lot of international scouts think he can be, that then this is for sure a protected seed. I think there's some real limitations in terms of their interior defense and perimeter shooting to make it that I wouldn't feel confident about throwing a top line seed or anything like that, sure, dark horse to win the national championship, why not? But in terms of am I going to have expectations of the second weekend? I don't think I'm going to set those expectations until probably January.
Right.
There's just so many questions on this team.
A lot of questions about this team, but a lot of fun getting to see how it all shakes out. I'm really excited about it. Tuck, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. Always appreciate having you on, your expertise, your insight into this team as we hit a new month here. We're still about 2 months away from craziness in the kennel, about 3 months away from the start of the season, but it is getting closer and closer, and I cannot wait. Folks, that's going to wrap it up for us today here on the Locked On Zags podcast and for this week. So everybody have a fantastic weekend. We'll be back on Monday, but until then, go Zags.